The word Python is such a fascinating thing. When you think about it, probably half the world thinks of Python as a poisonous snake, as a venomous snake. But us computer science folk, we think of Python as the most beautiful programming language ever to exist. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you've clicked on this video, I am confident that you already know that Python is one of the most popular programming languages today. It is used by a lot of people around the world to create such meaningful impact in a lot of different domains, and at the same time, Python programming jobs are really among the highest paid job regardless of where you are in the entire world today. But is that it? Well, let's find out. Now, ladies and gentlemen, whenever you think about Python programming or programming in general, it becomes very important that you understand not just how you go about programming, but also the impact that programming has on the world today. Now, whenever I think about programming, one person that comes into my mind is this person called as Mark Anderson. Mark Anderson is an American entrepreneur. He's an investor as well as a software engineer. He's a very talented guy who serves on the board of the following companies that you can see on your screen right now. So he's a guy who definitely knows his technology, and this is what he has to say about programming. Now, he says that learning to code is the single best thing that anyone can do to get the most of the amazing future that's in front of us. And again, if you're here, I probably know that you guys have an idea about this and that you probably have the same thoughts as Mark on this, right? Now, coming to Python, ladies and gentlemen, Python is such a beautiful language. It is changing the paradigm of programming language per se. Because when you think about it, did you actually know this fact that Python, the average age of the users who use Python is in between 20 and 29? There was a time when software engineering was still new and programming was still on the horizon, and during that time it was only guys who were these engineers who were maybe 30-35 year olds who were the ones who were programming. But now there's a huge paradigm shift where the majority of the users are in this age bracket, right? It's they're in the 20s, and that's such a nice fact to know. And now, if this impressed you, take a look at this. According to a 2015 research study, primary school students were interested to learn Python as much as they wanted to learn French or German. That's such a fascinating thing. We're talking about primary school students here, ladies and gentlemen, primary school students. The best part about Python programming that you really should think about is for a fact that Google says that it is the most searched programming language that we have in the entire world today. Now, I still remember the time a couple of years ago when Java was the king of all programming languages, and then Python slowly crept into the picture and it eventually overtook and surpassed Java. Today, Python is so far ahead in the entire world of programming that it has a chance to delve into any different domain that you can think of. Do you want to think of healthcare? Python is there. Do you want to think about machine learning? Of course, Python is used. Do you want to think about web development? Python is used there as well. So when you think about it, I think it becomes pretty obvious to understand that Python is really, in fact, the most the most popular, the most searched programming language out there. And for me, all those years ago when I was learning Python, it was an amazing thing. Everyone was saying that it is the next big thing, and probably looking at the number on your screen right now, you would agree to the same. There are over 9 million developers around the world who write Python code probably on a daily basis, and I am one of these guys, and I find it a ton of fun. And through this channel, I definitely believe that all of you all can work towards becoming Python developers in a way, not just that you can write code, but you can actually create beautiful products, and you can bring your own creativity, you can bring your own innovation through this language. Now, if you might be asking a question right away saying, so how is this different from C or C++? I can bring my own creativity in C or C++ as well. Through the rest of the video, if you follow along very closely, I am sure you will find an answer to that question. Now, before we talk a little bit about Python, I want to take you guys back to the basics for you guys to understand how a programming language works. Look at your screen. Whenever you've probably used your Google Assistant or whenever you've spoken to Siri on your mobile saying, hey Siri, set a reminder for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Or when you say, hey Google, what the weather is like tomorrow morning, it's just super convenient. This exact statement, what is the weather like tomorrow morning, is very simple. Google will give you an answer in a second, but it takes a lot of machine learning, a lot of natural language processing, a lot of other domains to actually predict what is happening in the future. Now, anyway, coming back to the talk here, what you see on your phone is basically this English language through which you just communicated to your phone. But your phone does not understand English language as much as you think it does. Now, take a look at the bottom part of the screen. You can see a couple of zeros and ones. Ladies and gentlemen, at any moment of time, any electronic device in the world, at its most fundamental level, unless we're talking about quantum computing, of course, it can only understand zeros and ones. No matter the fastest laptop, the fastest computer, the most brilliant phone to exist, no matter what, any electronic device which works in the digital medium, it uses zeros and ones to understand. So, but we're not writing Python code in zeros and ones. So what is going on? How are we writing something in an English language, and how is our computer understanding that and eventually converting it to zeros and ones, right? So it's basically a small translation that's happening between us writing the program in the English language versus the computer, versus the laptop or anything that's understanding it in the form of zeros and ones. So how did we go from, how you doing to something like 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0 and all that? You have to think about that. The very simple answer to that lies in the fact that we have translators in between us and our computers, us, our coding environment, and in between our computers, so that it helps us translate the English language and makes sure that the computer gets it in the form of zeros and ones. Now, you might have heard of these terms, compiler, interpreter, and all of that. Well, if you haven't, don't worry, I'm going to explain that quickly. Now, what happens when you write a certain piece of code? As I told you, your computer does not natively understand it. So it has to be compiled or it has to be interpreted. It has to be basically converted from one form into another. In the case of a compiler programming language, a compiler-based programming language, something like C or C++, what happens is that when you write, let's just say, 10 lines of programming code, you have written 10 lines of code. If there is an error even in one tiny bit of the code, you might have realized that your entire program never runs until you clear that error, recompile the program, as in rerun it, make sure it's error free, and when it runs really well, it works. But an interpreted programming language works very differently. Here, let's just say you've written 10 lines of code and there is an error on the 9th line. The best part about an interpreted programming language is that it executes line by line. So if you have an error on line number 9, everything will run perfectly until line number 8. Nothing will be interrupted, and Python as a programming language itself, you might have read about this, gives you very nice looking error messages to look at. As a programmer, when you're hunting for errors, when you've written a really long program and you're trying to fix the errors and all of that, the way that the language will tell you, what sort of errors exist can get confusing, can get boring. But I find Python's error messages, to be honest with you, to be actually very cute in a way where it gives you what you need to know, and eventually it's so crisp and concise that you will figure out a solution pretty quickly, right? At least in my case, when I was learning C, C++ or Java, I felt that difficulty when the language was trying to communicate back to me. In the case of Python, that doesn't happen. So to take a look at some of these compiler-based and interpreter-based languages, for the compiler ones, there's C, there's C++, and in fact, even Java is a compiler-based programming language. But since we're talking about Python, I want you guys to understand that Python is an interpreted programming language. And it's not just Python, there are other languages here as well. Languages such as JavaScript and languages such as Ruby are interpreted programming languages as well. So you now know that there is a translator that's sitting in between you writing your English code versus that being converted into zeros and ones, or object code as we call it in the case of your computer's side as well. But you might be asking, you might be asking one question at this moment of time, saying if we are writing it in English language, if we understand it really well, if my Google Assistant understands it really well, why can't we just get our machine to figure it out? Or you might be asking another question which says, hey, so is there any difference between C++ code, C and Python, Java, or anything as such? And it's a very good question to ask, because here is the answer that's lying in front of you right now. If you have never written a single line of code, do not be worried. You might be looking at two really pieces, two really decent looking snippets of code here, and you might tend to get confused. But what if I told you that both these pieces of code that you're seeing right now are doing the exact same thing? On the left, you have the sort of really complex syntax that C++ brings to the picture, and all we're trying to do is we're trying to print a message saying welcome to the LWA family. LWA is Learn with Anirudh, so welcome to the family. And we're just trying to add two numbers. 1 plus 2 is equal to 3. That's all I want to do. And if you choose to do it in C++, you have to pick a route that you see on the left hand side. But to answer your question about Python's popularity, take a look at the two lines of code that you see on the right side. If you've never written Python code as well, you can guess what is happening. So for a person, I've done this experiment myself with hundreds of students that I've taught previously, where I give them a tiny piece of code snippet and ask them what they think is going on in the program. And out of somewhere around 80 or 85 of these students, I eventually had a chance where 50 or 60 people who had never written a line of code in their life guessed exactly what was happening. Now that is a very important thing for you guys to understand as beginners, because down the line you might expect that Python can get as complicated as C++, but the answer is it does not. It stays as simple as this, as you see on your screen. And Python is one of these languages where you really don't have to write a lot of code to have a lot of impact. A small amount of code is good enough for a large impact as well. And such a fascinating product is only because of a genius called Guido van Rossum. Guido is a fantastic programmer. He's an amazing guy. If you ever have the time to explore more about it, I really suggest you watch a couple of YouTube videos. There are a lot of interviews, a lot of places where he gives talks, and he has amazing insights as always. So instead of me telling you what Python is in my opinion, let us hear it from the creator himself. He says that Python is an experiment in how much freedom programmers need. If you give programmers too much freedom, we cannot understand each other's code, because you would have written it in a way that you would understand, I would have written it in a way I would understand, right? Eventually, there's a good chance we might never meet in the middle. But if there is a language such as C++ or another language where the syntax is pretty complex, this is where you have too little freedom. Everyone has to use the complex syntax to work with, and there what happens is that your brain and all your capabilities are basically focusing on the language itself, while there's a sacrifice being happening in the back end where you don't have enough time for creativity, where you don't have enough time to be expressive. A language is just a tool, it is not the goal. Python is a programming language wherein you can have the ability to write code in a very easy manner, wherein you will have time to actually spend your focus on solving the problem rather than breaking your head about the complex syntax, because in my opinion there is no complex syntax in Python. Now, coming on to a section where people keep asking me about the difficulties when it comes to setting up Python, when it comes to installing Python. Here at LWA, I have one answer for you all, and you can see that on your screen right now. Installing Python, ladies and gentlemen, is an absolute piece of cake, because it is you're 2-3 clicks away from installing Python from its official website. On the actual site, you might see a lot of things, but let me tell you at this moment that there are a lot of programming language websites, and in my opinion, Python is really the one where it's very, very structured. And if you are a person who has never written a line of code, it is very much possible for you to figure everything out that's present on their site. Be it the documentation, there are certain tutorials to help you get started, and of course a place where you can download and install Python as well. Python is a programming language that does not depend on your operating system. So Python works the exact same way on Windows as it does on Mac, as it does on Linux as well. So regardless of the operating system that you are using right now, you might be watching this on your smart TV, you might be watching this on your Mac, you might be watching this on your desktop, on your phone, on your iPhone running iOS, or on your Android phone. wherever it is, you have Python interpreters. There's an app that you can install to start writing code regardless of the operating system that you guys are working on. Now, I understand that some of you all have come back to me in the past to say that, hey, I installed Python, I went to the website, I downloaded Python, I set it up, but there's so many steps to do. Now, there's another thing, in the modern world where we are bringing together the world of data science, the world of cloud computing together. Just Google this. It's called as Google Colab, 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 and it stands for collaboratory. This is basically an integrated development environment where you can write Python code. All you're going to need is your mobile or your laptop and an internet connection. You don't have to download anything. You don't even have to set up anything, and you can start writing Python code right away. Take a look at your screen. It is actually very, very easy to, just write a line of code, hit a play button just as if you were probably watching something on Netflix, and boom, you're done. Your Python code is ready. And it's not just these simple code snippets. All the machine learning, all the neural network demos that I have ever done in my entire programming career, 99% of it I've done on Google Colab, and it handles it with absolute ease. Again, it uses all the power, all the CPU, the graphic cards present in the Google Cloud platform, so you really don't need the latest and the greatest computer to run Python efficiently. Now, let's just come to a section where we'll take a look at the key features of Python. To begin with, I want to tell you guys that there's a ton of features, and I'm not really kidding when I say a ton of features, because Python has such a huge footprint in today's world. It literally, you can pick out features as if you were picking out probably grass on your nearest, on your forest floor or nearest lawn or something like that. There's a lot of features. But the best part is there are some really important ones that you guys should know as beginners, as people who are new into the world of programming and Python, and let's discuss some really important ones. The first thing that I want to talk to you guys about is that Python is a high-level programming language. When I say high-level programming language, what I mean is that you are writing code in the English language in a very, very easy to understand manner. You are not really writing it where, if you've seen the C++ code, we saw so many different words. We saw hashtag include. Now, some of you all might be thinking about Instagram as soon as you think about a hashtag. There were so many words that you don't know what it means. C in, C out, return, int main. All of these are pretty complex. And of course, the semicolons. If you miss a semicolon, the program never runs. Now, I'm not trying to say that C++ is a bad programming language and Python does everything beautifully. Each language has its own pros and cons, but in this, I really think Python wins hands down, because whatever you look at, whatever you read and write on any books is exactly the sort of language that you do. Yes, there is a small syntax that you'll have to follow. There are tiny set of rules that you have to adhere to, but it is not as complex as other programming languages. Coming to the second point, Python is an object-oriented programming language. When you're talking about an object-oriented programming language, every single thing, every single data point, basically everything that happens in your program will be treated as an object. There's something called objects, there are methods, there are classes. I know you might have not heard of these words, and some of you all who are experts in the world of programming, you might have heard the C++, in fact, is an object-oriented programming language on its own. Python supports a lot of these OOP features, or it's called as OOPS, object-oriented programming structures. Things such as encapsulation, things such as abstraction, inheritance, and polymorphism are some things which are supported by Python. Now, do not worry if you do not know what these mean at this point of time, because down the line with further videos, we will make sure to dive right into the heart of each of these concepts, understand theoretically how they work, and relate it to Python, and eventually practically figure out what encapsulation, what sort of encapsulation is happening in Python, where is the inheritance coming from, what is this really complex term called polymorphism, and a lot more. Now, coming to the third key feature, this is something that I really like, and this was some of the things that had me fascinated when I was learning Python maybe 10 years ago. It's a dynamically typed programming language. Take a look at the first line where, I've cancelled it out, because here, if you were to write it in C++, you have a variable A and you're assigning 10 to a particular variable. That is it. But in the case of C++, you have to also specify this. You have to say that it is an integer. You have to tell C++ that, hey, the number that I'm about to give you is an integer, please consider that. Python really does not ask for any of these. It is intelligent enough to figure out whatever you have given. If you type out your name, it understands that it has to take it as a string. If you give out a single number, it knows that you have to take it as an integer. And if you choose a decimal number, 3.142, 10.9, 6.9, whatever is the number that you want to think of, and if it has the floating point number, it knows it is decimal automatically. So you really don't have to type int a equal to 10, float b equal to 10. All you have to do is put your variable name equal to the value that you want to assign to that variable, and boom, you're done. Now at this moment of time, you might feel like, hey, do we really save a lot of time thinking about all of these? Because in a statically typed programming language, there's a lot of chances where things can go wrong. You might have given it as an integer, but you might have used the floating point value. It'll lead to a lot of errors, and as a beginner, that can really turn you off as well. Coming to point number 4. Point number 4, we'll talk about portability. As I told you previously, Python is not dependent on your operating system. The output of after you executing a Python piece of code is something called as a bytecode. The bytecode will run regardless of any operating system, and it will work the same. Python will work the same on your Mac, will work the same on Windows, on your Android phone, in fact on iOS as well. But the only thing that changes is for a fact that you'll have to probably install an app. On Mac, you might have to install Python in a different way. On Windows, you have to install it in a different way. Installation part of it differs, but the overall remains the same. The advantage here, in my opinion, is that you can, write code anywhere you want, and you can run it anywhere that you want, and you really do not have to break your head about the environment. You'll have a chance to think about the code rather than think about the environment. And down the line, that is actually a really big point, as you'll see in the next couple of videos. Now, the last key feature that I want to discuss are the libraries and the contributors of Python. Ladies and gentlemen, when we say the words library, when we say the words packages, or when we say the word helpers, understand that these are literally the helpers which will help you to reduce your effort in actually coding. It might be, for a fact that you'll have to write a smaller amount of code to do to basically have a larger impact on the output. And Python has 150,000 packages in its repository. Each one is put there for a reason. Each one will help you get to your goal faster. And us Python programmers have a common saying: if you have a problem, if you have a problem statement, Python will have a package to help you solve that in an easy manner. How cool is that? And it's an open source programming language thanks to Guido and all the other contributors. Those guys in the backend are working really hard to make sure that it is very easy for us programmers to write code. So, my utmost respect goes out to all of these contributors who are making the language very nice for all of us to use. And the community is absolutely beautiful. Regardless of where you are, even if you do not know how to write a single line of code, there are people who will absolutely help you, guide you to make sure that you will get to their level of expertise. Be it anywhere, be it Facebook, be it on LinkedIn, there are a ton of groups everywhere. And if you're a part of these groups, you will realize that this is a very friendly community, and everyone has this love for the language that I am, that you can probably sense from my tone right now. So I really love these features about Python, and I think as a beginner, you guys should look at that as well. But as a beginner, I know that there's something else that you might be thinking about, is understanding how you can go about, working with Python and building a career around Python, right? So you'll have a question saying, how can I become, what do I have to do to become a Python programmer? Or maybe what domain should I look for when I'm thinking about Python programming? Take a look at your screen right now. I'm pretty sure, ladies and gentlemen, that you will be impressed. Python works absolutely well in all of these different domains, be it machine learning, artificial intelligence, mobile app development, back-end development, game designing, big data handling, web development, software development, testing. Ladies and gentlemen, if you can tell me the name of a domain, I will tell you how Python is probably used in that domain. That is really the reach, the very far and wide reach that Python brings to the picture. And you should be smiling wide right now, because regardless of it, not everyone has to become a Python developer. You can become a machine learning engineer and still use Python on an everyday basis. You can become a web developer and still use libraries libraries such as Flask and Django to go about doing it. So regardless of the designation that you might hold in the future, know that there is a ton of potential and that you will be using Python in its simplest form in all of these cases. Even in the most complex machine learning demos that I have had to show to you guys, to learners previously, the syntax always remains the same. The syntax remains as easy as it can get. So for all you people who are looking for jobs, for all you people who are trying to prepare for a career in Python, the first thing that I want to tell you right now is that there are a ton of jobs available. These are the examples that you can see on your screen right now. Snippets from Naukri.com, LinkedIn, and Indeed.com. These are the top job hunt sites in India. I'm very sure you will have your own job hunt sites from wherever you are tuning across the world. There are many jobs, and all these numbers that you're seeing right now, these are just the Python developers role. This is literally one among this entire list that you see, and in data science itself there's 5-6 designations you can hold. As a web developer you can have 5-6 designations. So all in all, you definitely have access to probably the number of jobs that you're seeing right now multiplied by 30, multiplied by 50 right at this moment. And during the COVID pandemic, since the world is still working remotely, I think right now your resume, your programming skills will be an asset regardless of where you are. If you're in India right now and you want to apply to a lot of American companies out there previously, which would have been not possible, now since there's remote working, there's a very good chance your application will get picked up and you will be earning in USD. Take a look at your screen right now. These are the top guys that use Python on an everyday basis. We have trillions and trillions. I didn't say billions, ladies and gentlemen. I said trillions. Trillions and trillions of dollars of worth of business is what you see on your screen right now. And these guys use Python. And since you're watching this on YouTube right now, you have to understand that YouTube has been built by using a lot of Python. If you guys are watching this on your Mozilla Firefox browsers, understand that there is over 250,000 lines of code written to make sure that Firefox works. And since you guys are using that to tune in, if you have used Firefox, if you in Firefox, if you have used YouTube, and if you're tuning in, understand that you're using 3-4 products at the same time using Python. The best part is it's not just these guys who are hiring for Python roles. There are thousands and thousands of companies, and every single company, regardless of its size, small size company, medium size, or even the really large Fortune 500 multinational corporations we have, they use Python on a daily basis. There is always a requirement for Python. And in terms of difficulty, ladies and gentlemen, well, Python is not really a difficult programming language to learn. And with this channel, we're going to be doing a lot of Python programming, and I really want to prove to you guys that it is a very simple language to learn. And maybe, as I just told you in my introductory video, you might require a different way to learn. So guys, with this, I really hope that I gave you a quick insight about Python and what it's doing to the world right now. Of course, there's a lot more things to discuss, and with the upcoming, with the further videos, we'll definitely go about learning a lot more things. So with this, I really hope I have had a chance to earn your subscription, earn your support, because your support is definitely what keeps going. So thank you so much for watching this video. Stay tuned for more. Cheers.